Hello, Virginia educators. I'm Annette Conley. I'm a reading specialist in Virginia Beach, and I am joined today by the lovely Jen Hawes. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Jen Hawes. I am a principal currently in Virginia Beach. As a reading specialist for 12 years, so I'm excited to share my passion for reading with you today along with Annette. We're so glad that you could join us online.
Yes. So the title of our session is about teaching with urgency, getting the max out of instruction. And then Jen thought of a great way to think of it as exponential teaching. How do we take it to that next level? So teaching squared. And here's what we are going to try to cover with you today. We're going to give you some activities and lessons that meet the SOLs, of course. And we're going to try to show you how these lessons can maximize instruction and how you can try to layer the SOLs and try to get the most out of every lesson that you teach. So our goals, we want to provide you with engaging lessons. We all know how important that is. And then we want to give you effective strategies for teaching the SOLs. So we want to talk about why. We had lots of choices of things we could present. And for some reason, the urgency piece really stuck out to us. So we want to talk about the why. Why do we think that this school year, the school year that starts in August or September, depending on where you are, why we think it is more urgent than ever for us to amp up our teaching and to move to the next level. And for me personally, it's the students that I can list and the students that I can picture that when I was teaching them virtually, I was so worried about them. And all I could think about was, what can I do in this chunk of time to try to get them to be engaged with me? And what can I do to get these lessons maximized for them? And that's just, it completely changed my teaching this year. I imagine it did for any of you out there that had to teach virtually. We all had to think about just what could we do to maximize instruction. And I really thought of it as an emergency. Like we needed to get our kids on board and we needed to get them to understand things and buy into our teaching so very much.
Yes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my why when this has been the year that we've thought a lot about equity and how do we help child A and child B be able to receive those services. And of course, when the pandemic first hit, we were just trying to get everybody online together. But when you look at that home that we all got to jump into each child's home and you get to see what's happening there. You see one child with a parent sitting right next to them, helping them for every assignment and supporting and asking questions. And you see another child who's literally holding the 2-year-old in their arms, trying to participate in the lesson. And I think, across the state and across the country, we've all worried about that word learning loss. And I really, I don't subscribe to learning loss because I don't know if the students actually had the information at first. So when we talk more, I think it's learning gaps. And so everything that we want to present today is really targeting those gaps. I kind of think of it as a little bit of a Tetris. We've got those gaps that we've got to fit something back in, and we've got to do it quick because if we want it to be equitable and we want to catch students up and we want to equalize what student A and student B got, we're going to need to do something different. So that is our why, the students that are out there that deserve those gaps to be filled.
I love that, Jen. Yes, I love that. So Jen, do you want to talk about this slide?
So this is my visual. I tend to be a very visual learner. And so this is the way I kind of see it in my head. If you kind of think the blue is supposed to represent, you know, the kids' foundational skills that they already have received in the years that they've already been in school. So if we think of last year as year one of the pandemic, there's a little gap there in the middle of something that they missed last year. Maybe we all left at for that end of the quarter. We all know inferencing was missed because we tend to teach that towards the end of the year. Some of the summarizing, some of those objectives that we usually kind of save to more of the spring. So we have that gap. Well, by this year, when we started to come back to school, we spent some of the time virtually, and in Virginia Beach, we were lucky enough to bring most of the kids back. 70% of my kids in my building came back to face-to-face instruction. But that gap kind of increased, and it increased because not only did they miss last year's content, maybe on inferencing or summarizing, but this year they were supposed to go to the next level on inferencing and summarizing. So if we keep trying to just kind of plug in, oh, they missed this one little concept, that gap actually gets bigger. So we need to teach exponentially to fill in a bigger gap. And that's just the visual way that I can think of how do we help our students and what do they need. So, you know, gaps grow exponentially, so learning must grow exponentially, hence teaching squared. That's our idea.
I love that. And then I just want to show a little bit of a video of some student voices, because I think we all get out of bed every day to teach because we know the students need us. And this video really, really struck a chord with me about why we've got to go with teaching squared. Can you all see the screen still, Jen? Is it the YouTube video now?
Yes, you got it.
Awesome.
Except I need volume. Whoops.
NBC News spoke with kids about their experiences with remote learning as part of tonight's special, Coronavirus and the Classroom.
I feel like remote learning does not feel like it's still learning.
Well, it was kind of funner than real school. No, it wasn't.
I think I'm learning less when doing it online. When you're in regular school, you get to walk up to a teacher and ask her questions. And when you're at home, you can't do that.
You're gonna have to speak through technology usually, doing like your electronic, like doing Zoom or something, or like a Google Meet or something like that.
You're talking with someone that you're not seeing, and you're far away from, so you can't interact as much.
It's uncomfortable to me because my friends help me with my work and anything if I get confused what I'm on or what I'm doing.
In school, you could learn 2 lessons a day, but in online school they teach you one thing and it goes on for the whole week. But in regular school, you can move on.
I was just sick of being in the same room all day.
I've enjoyed this remote learning, to be honest.
I want to be staying at home because school, I don't like that much.
So that's just a little bit of a glimpse of what some of the students think. And I do think it's interesting. So many students were raring to come back. They really were, but it was still a really hard adjustment for a lot of the kids. And so I think the students' why is that they need us more than ever, more than they ever have. And I think they know that they are a little bit behind and that there is a gap. So I just wanted to show a little bit of that so we could kind of get into the brain of the students. And now Jen's going to show us how to get the kids on board. And then once we have the kids on board, we can talk about how we can do teaching squared.
So I think really that's a perfect video, Annette, because it really does start with the students. I think throughout the year, I saw so many teachers stressed and saying, you know, like, but I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to show them this and I'm trying to show them that. And I think that that a lot of people fell back to didn't lead to the gains in the students, because the students are the learners. So we talk a lot about student agency, and I really loved this quote from Waite, that student agency is a precious resource. And if we are going to get kids caught up and fill in those gaps, we need them to be the right resource. They need to take ownership. They have to have control over their learning and control the learning variables. I think too often we send the message to kids that school is something that happens to them instead of with them and through them. And so as they sat on the computer and like stared at the screen, we didn't get the engagement always because they just thought it was happening to them. So if we're going to fill in the gaps, we need to really help them understand that they are the first gap filler and they're the ones that need to take ownership of those gaps. And how they can do that is really a lot about goal setting. VDOE has other presentations already set up on goal setting. I encourage you to search VDOE plus goal setting, because that information is true before virtual and then stays true now. But it all needs to start with the students. So when we talk about student agency, really what is student agency? This one kind of cracks me up because we always create new terms in education. We used to call it student ownership all the time. And then suddenly we started calling it student agency. But I think the agency is important because it has that time element, that it's super important that they need to do it now. It has implications for everyone. It's not just for students. It has implications for after school. And it really involves the students themselves setting the goals. So when we really kind of look at how do kids set goals, really 3 simple steps. We don't need to, over engineer this. They set the goal. What do they want to accomplish? Put act in towards the goal, do something, and then reflect on where they're at. And I think we make the goal setting process way more complicated than it needs to be. Yeah. And then I think we do a great job of setting those goals, and we start off towards acting, but then we forget that step 3 of the reflecting on goal progress. And we act like, okay, it's done. So we really, I think, to start off the year, the first thing I really encourage everybody to do is really think about what are you going to do to help your kids set goals, and really plan in where are going to be those checkpoints that they reflect. Is it going to be a weekly thing? Is it going to be a bi-weekly or monthly thing? But they need that regular reflection. I think, Annette and I have done many presentations together, and you kind of see a little formula that we always start with the why. And we got to start with a why with the kids too. Once again, school's not happening to them, it's happening through them. It's their learning. So we need to talk about the why do they set goals? Why do they need to take ownership? What is their role within education? And then of course, we can't forget the other stakeholders involved. Where are the parents? Letting the parents know, hey, this is the goal your child is setting. If you could help support them at home, if you could help talk to them at home, if you could role model goal setting yourself, because we learned so much through the pandemic of the importance of how parents take an active role in their child's education.
Yes. And, I always say, and this is so true, there is no student that looks at a score that they receive, and if it's not a proficient score, no student says, yay, I really didn't rock that. I think if we involve them, then they go, oh, I needed to do this to get there. And then that's what I say to the parents. We're working together. These are the goals that we are working on. What can you do to help support your child? Because whenever you have a parent meeting, they aren't thrilled either if their student is not proficient. So what I do with my reading intervention students, we set goals every week. And I used to do like an incentive program. I don't do that anymore. I just say to them, are you working toward your goals? Is the behavior you're doing right now helping you meet your goals? And I'll tell you, that works like magic, way better than, I need your eyes on me, I need you to stop talking, So we want to get them thinking about those goals and reflecting. Jen, that's such an important piece, that reflection.
It's got to start there. So then we came up with this idea of, we threw of max teaching, maximizing teaching. What do we do? But really, as I said, when I think of that visual and that gap growing exponentially, we decided we were going to have to do teaching squared, exponential teaching. And so we've created this term, exponential teaching. Here we go, because we're educators and we like to create vocabulary. But exponential teaching is really this very deliberate teaching. It takes planning, it takes some thought. It's not just kind of stick to what we've already done, pull that out of your pocket, always taught that lesson on inferencing. Nope, you're going to have to bump it up. Exponential teaching really does lead to deeper learning. I honestly believe that, because first of all, the kids are taking ownership, and second of all, you're linking the objectives. And those are going to be the two big things that you're going to see us talk about through this presentation. Kids, what are the kids doing? How are they taking ownership? And how can we link what we're doing? How can we connect that content? And so, it really uses best practices. When you hear of like Hattie's work on feedback and Hattie's work on, student goal setting and learning, I think, exponential teaching includes all of those ideas that have been out in education for years. So we're not really proposing anything new. We're proposing just to keep it focused. And I really think it's important that we understand exponential teaching requires student input and teacher input. The teachers cannot solve this problem on their own. And the teachers that I'm working with, my staff, when they get the most stressed, and they are like worried about that particular kid, I'm like, okay, what's the kid's role in this? Because we can't solve this alone. That is a powerless feeling, to think that we're trying to do it all on our own. We got to bring the kids in. So let's talk about like those examples. What, teaching squared specifically, what are we going to do? So the first concept I really think is about learning targets. And the learning targets is really the kid side of it. I think the Leaders of Their Own Learning is one of my favorite books. If you're looking for something to get you focused again on learning targets and kind of some student agency. But we need to share specifically with students what the focus of instruction is. We need to base our instruction on learning targets. And I think I see in lots of classrooms, I've been in 12 buildings now. I counted it, 12, Annette. I think I might have you beat.
You beat me. Yes, I've only been in 11.
Exactly. But I think we have teachers that post those targets, teachers that, write a couple of them up at the beginning of the week, or maybe you talk in the morning, hey, here are our 3 targets, but then they never come back to them during the day. We have to be very deliberate that we share with students, this whole group lesson is going to be about making connections. So our target is, I can make connections to the text from one text to another text. Okay, so let's talk about that target. For that target, we know about connections. Everybody's been making the connections. We do the little symbol with our hands and we know what that is, but text to text doesn't just mean it's about me. I'm connecting from one story to another. So I want you to think about it, boys and girls, where are you in relationship to the target? You're pretty good at connecting to yourself, but how are you about connecting from one story to another? That might be something that's a little difficult or something that's really difficult for you. So in today's lesson, as we're learning about making connections, you need to think about where you are in that target. So if you're down here you're going to have to make sure you pay quality attention today and ask questions, because that's where your learning is going to come from. So first is just that sharing the targets with the students. We need to talk specifically about them. We need them to rate, self-reflect, where are you in relationship to the target? The next thing is we really need to talk about grade level expectations. So how does the learning target move from one grade level to another? If we think back to that graph, that picture that I made about the gap growing bigger, okay, what is the target for making connections? Last year in first grade, you had to make connections to yourself. By second grade, we're making connections between the text. It's still making connections. Where are you? Are you still working on the first grade target? Are we ready for the second grade target? Or third grade target, making connections between text and to the world. So we got to kind of discuss that with the kids and let them see how the years build on each other. Students need to like own their progress in relationship to the target. That's the self-reflect, where am I at? And then they need to really commit to closing that gap. I talk to students, what are you doing if this is hard for you? Do you maybe need some extra practice when you go home tonight? Maybe you need to make some connections to your story when you're jumping in bed with mom and dad. How was your attention? As Annette said, that instead of the reinforcement and telling the kids that they get a treat for sitting up and doing this and doing that, really, as you're laying there on your bed, not paying attention, how is that helping you get to your target of making connections? You just told me it was hard for you. So are you doing what you need to do for that target? And they need to be able to ask questions about those words in the learning target that they don't know. And they need to be able to ask for help. This is hard for me. How can you help me? So the first teaching exponential concept is all about the learning target. So it doesn't matter what the concept is. Is it inferencing? Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it writing? But it doesn't matter as long as you're going to share with them what the target's going to be. So that's the first big tool.
And I love that, Jen, because I know so many people are like, oh, well, my principal makes me put up the learning targets. Well, you're giving the why. That's why we're not just putting them up, right? We want them to own their learning. I love that.
And the second concept of this teaching exponentially, and this is the net side, is really that how can we combine the learning targets? How can we combine the objectives? Which SOLs will really work together? So first is really kind of identifying those objectives that can be taught in combination, which things kind of go together. I think a big idea just to really save some time is just really use the same whole group text or the same discussion and focus on multiple targets or multiple objectives instead of rereading, oh, this book is all about inferencing and this book is all about making connections. Let's read the same book and talk about the inferences and connections. We've got to work smarter if we're going to fill in the gaps, teach exponentially. And we really have to target some critical objectives. We all know those objectives that require greater thinking and that require greater understanding and practice. The main idea, kids, that's what we miss on the SOL test. Main ideas in summarizing and inferences, because they are harder. So we need to target those critical objectives and put them and spend the time and not wait until the end of the quarter, end of the year where we might miss it. And we need to see, really help the students see, hey, how does it relate? That's where the key comes in. They need to understand that, hey, what's the difference between retelling and summarizing? Okay, both of them I'm using my memory, but one requires a lot more detail than the other. And one requires some synthesis and putting ideas together. So we need to share that with them. So I think the next slide might help kind of explain how we can combine. Okay, once again, you see, I'm always visual. I always have a visual that I like to create. I think students need to understand that a lot of these objectives relate. Teachers, I made this little image actually first in collaboration with some teachers, because we spent a lot of time talking about what's the difference between summarizing and retelling and main idea. And really, if you think about it, the topic starts with one word. And then from one word, we can go to one sentence, hey, main idea. From main idea, we get broader, the triangle gets larger, the summary, we got to include information from beginning, middle, and end. Versus retelling, you're going to give the most information possible. But look, if you think of this little graph, how many objectives we can cover. You can get all your fact, opinion, fiction, nonfiction in simply with the topic. Main idea is that huge objective that everything is built on. What is it mostly about? What is it mainly about? You can practice those question stems. Summary, you're really going to get ideas from the beginning, middle, and end. You can link your question words. You can link a lot of writing into who, what, when, where, why, and how when you do your summary. you're summarizing, somebody wanted, but so any of those, link those writing objectives in. And then of course, retelling is really about giving as much information as possible. You're identifying the relevant information. Is it fact? Is it opinion? You're remembering all of your sequencing information in there. Then all of those things about which question is answered in paragraph. So you can link all of those into your retelling because it's all the information. So I really think we need to think as teachers and understand how the objectives are related together and be able to show the kids, hey, I'm not asking you to do something completely different when I go from summarizing to retelling. I'm asking you to provide more information, to remember more details.
I love that graphic, Jen. I love it.
It helps me. So just a little quick example. I grabbed a passage from ReadWorks just on Komodo dragons. And I just wanted to kind of show you just a little example on how this really, is very easy, but works. We'll see, because I don't have my reading glasses on. How far can I sit back? Okay, you have probably heard or read at least one fairy tale with a dragon as a character. In these stories, dragons fly around breathing fire and frightening innocent people until a brave knight comes along and kills the dragon. But there is no proof that these fairy tale dragons ever existed. There is, however, one real dragon that does exist, the Komodo dragon. No, it does not breathe fire and it does not fly. It's just a big reptile. They can be pretty mean. It's rare, but they have attacked and even killed humans. So be careful if you ever are traveling through Indonesia. These dragons are named after the island of Komodo, which is part of Indonesia. They can be found on 4 or 5 other Indonesian islands as well, but overall, they're pretty rare. Okay, you got the idea, general passage. But if I go and look at that same graph, how can we do it? So Annette, go ahead to the other screen because I don't think
I did.
Oh, perfect. So our topic, of course, Komodo dragons, fiction, nonfiction. Let's think. It started off talking about fairy tales, some fiction. If you just, from a cursory glance, you might have thought it was going to be a fiction passage, but then they went into all the details about a real live animal. So it's nonfiction. Main idea, Komodo dragons are rare reptiles who are carnivores. They talk, all the other paragraphs talk about the fact that they are reptiles, what they eat, how they get around, and that they attack people and stuff. But in the summary, we got to get more information in the summary. I got to have beginning, middle, and end. So Komodo dragons are not just a fairy tale. They're real animals. They live in Indonesia where it's hot and dry. They are large reptiles. They have a good sense of smell, and they eat meat. Okay, so now do you see how much more information I had versus the main idea? And I still included information from the beginning, middle, and end. But by a retelling, I'm going to have to give a lot more information. There's no proof that fairy tale dragons exist, although a lot of stories are told about dragons. True, that's how it all started out with the fairy tales. Komodo dragons do not breathe fire, but they are real. So we're going to give more information. So I just wanted to kind of provide a visual to kind of exponential teaching, get us started. And that's got some great ideas of specific lessons that she's used. But I think the thinking starts at this level and the planning when we think of starting kind of like that topic on the left and which ideas can we relate to each other.
Well, and look at everything you're able to do with that short little article. You can cover so much. You can really, really do so much with a short article like that. And that's what we have to do. That's what we mean by teaching squared. Every piece of text you look at, you think, what can I do to make this grow exponentially? What can I do to power this lesson up? Or like we said on the other slide, to put it in hyperdrive, right? So what I did this year, once we came back, like I said, I felt like it was a total emergency. So when I would do a lesson, lessons that I had done before, lessons that worked really well for me, I would pull out those old lessons and think, okay, what can I do to power this lesson up? How can I layer more SOLs? It's emergency time. I've got to get more done with every lesson that I teach. So you think of a lesson that you've done and you just think, how could I give it more power? So that's what I want you to start doing with every time you think about a lesson you're going to do. What can you do to make it teaching squared? So I wanted you guys just to think for a minute, because we've been talking so very much. Think about a lesson. We all had those lessons that we thought, man, I rocked that. That was awesome. Those are the lessons that you want to think about. What could I do to power it up? And it also could be a lesson that flopped, where you were like, oh, so you can think of what you could have done to make that better. So I thought, if you guys want to, you could turn your camera off, you could turn the recording off, and just think for a minute about lessons that you have done before and think about how you could add more power. And now I'm going to give you a specific example of a lesson that I powered up, that I made teaching squared. So I'm going to divide this part into whole group lessons and small group lessons so that you will have a variety of things to choose from. The first lesson that I powered up for you is a lesson about predictions. And like Jen said, when you teach predictions, you are helping lead the way to inferencing. That's why we start with predicting. So I listed for you here, and I know it's really hard to read, all of the different objectives that I will cover in this prediction lesson. This is a predicting fiction lesson, but I'm going to put in some vocabulary pieces. I'm going to put in the decoding pieces. And if you are predicting in fiction, you're going to talk about the characters. You're going to talk about the setting. You're going to talk about the plot. So you're going to get more layers in this lesson because you're going to cover, but you're not just going to cover, you're going to deeply teach the parts of predicting. So years ago, Jen created this really cool thing called a predictogram, and we used it all the time, and we absolutely loved it. So this year, when it was time for me to do the predictogram, I thought, okay, I'm going in. I have 40 minutes for this lesson. What can I do to amp up the predictogram lesson? Now, the other thing I got really good at this year, I don't know if you all did, but I became a master of the dry erase board. I didn't have time, I didn't have time for kids to be writing on paper. We lived with the dry erase board. So Jen's predictogram, when we first did it, was very much more elaborate. Now I just have the kids, and they love how bad I am at drawing straight lines. They all want to help me. But I have them just draw the 4 squares, and in one, we write setting, and the others, we write characters. We write the conflict and the resolution. And this reviews those critical parts of fiction. And of course, in the lesson, I would say, what do we know about fiction? What does fiction have? Fiction has these 4 things. So this is your predictogram. Now I'm going to switch to another slide so I can tell you how my brain worked on this. So I thought, if I'm going to give them words in this predictogram, which is what you do, you select words, I'm going to do something with those words. I'm not just going to slap them up there. So I'm going to give you an example of how you would do a predictogram with Mr. Lincoln's Way. All 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers should use this book at the beginning of the year. It is such a good, first of all, social emotional book. It is such a good, let's set our classroom community book. It's just one of my very favorites, Mr. Lincoln's Way by Patricia Polacco. Now, as the teacher,
Good one, Annette. I just have to tell you, I love that one. Oh,
I figured you would, Jen. No, now that you're a principal too, I thought I should pick it because now you're a principal. And it says he's the coolest principal. We all know Ms. Hawes is the cool principal too. So what you do as the teacher is that you look at the book ahead of time and you think of 6 to 8 words that you would want to pre-teach from this. And so I'll show you the words that I picked for this predictogram. I picked bully, atrium, nuthatches, mallard, Eugene Esterhaus. I thought we should do his whole name because it's really a fun word to break apart. Grandpa, Mr. Lincoln, pond, principal, and proud. Now, I would write these words on the board as I was doing it, on the dry erase board as I was doing it, and I would do a word lesson. So bully, boys and girls, bully. How many syllables in bully? What sound does the U make? Is it it is. So it's the short U. You want to put these words up and you want to do some word lessons with them. The word atrium, they probably don't know. What a great way to review open syllables. A, tree, and then look at So you teach each word first, and you do it as a word lesson. You review syllable rules. You review short and long vowels. I picked nuthatches on purpose. That's a kind of bird. I figure they don't know what that is. Mallard, they may not know that it's a duck. Plus, we've got a good R-controlled vowel in there. So I would talk about that. Eugene, and then what I would say to the kids is, boys and girls, look at his last name. Let's try to figure out how we would say this. So house. Well, boys and girls, that AU makes a different sound. So the words that I picked for the predictogram, I'm going to pre-teach to the students. We're going to do a word lesson with them. Then we're going to take those words and decide where they go. So we do the first couple ones together, and then I get them to do that on their own. So boys and girls, from our lesson, what do we think could be a setting word? Oh, pond. Yeah, pond could be a setting word. And so we write pond there. And then what was that word, boys and girls, that none of us knew? That would be a place, wouldn't it? Atrium. And we would continue, and then I'd have them go back and do the rest. Sometimes I have them do it with a partner. So where would bully go? Oh, could bully be the conflict? Ooh, or could it be the character? How about, so we would keep revisiting those words. And you're going to be teaching these concepts. Now, how could that be a conflict? Remember what a conflict is. A conflict's a problem. How could that be the resolution? Could a mallard, could a duck be a resolution? Maybe. How about proud? Where would proud go? So you really do a lot with the words, but you're also teaching all of the elements of fiction. And they're having to predict, because I have to think about where would these words go. So you are covering so many objectives. You're not covering so many objectives. You're teaching so many objectives. And as Jen said, I would have those objectives as my learning target. Boys and girls, not only are we going to predict, but we're going to review those story elements. You're going to be able to tell me what makes fiction fiction. And so we do the story map. And then okay, so let me go to the next one. I did type it all out for you, but I know it's a lot. And then, you read, you stop occasionally and you say, what do we think about those words? Did we have them in the right place? Yeah, we were right. Eugene certainly was one of the characters. Yeah, and the conflict. Ooh, I do think it's about him being a bully. So you just keep reviewing the objectives. And then in grades 4 and 5, predicting isn't as much of an objective as setting and characters is. So you really hone in on that character development. What did the author do to make us not like Eugene very much? So it's just an example of how you can take a lesson and make it teaching squared. You're going to cover so many things. And I really think, I don't know about your system, but in my system, vocabulary is not addressed always. And so if we can do vocabulary and comprehension together, help them know what a mallard is, help them know what an atrium is, and teach the word concepts, then you are really doing teaching squared. Now, I want to show you something.
Can I jump in, Annette? Because
yes.
I love that concept. And I have to admit, the predictogram was not made by me. Someone else.
Oh,
made it.
shoot. I always thought it was yours.
No, I copied the idea from someone else, but we modified it through the years. So I'll take some modification. But the best part is, you know, when we think of that predicting objective, how it changes through the years, it's not just making predictions, it's confirming. So as you're going, you can confirm and put check marks right next to, you're right, pond was a place, I got the setting. But that revising of literally drawing the line and putting it where it should be. I used to have the kids erase, and we stopped erasing and instead started drawing lines to what our revisions, where it went to. And because at the end of the lesson, it was so powerful to have that visual of look at all the ways we revised our thinking as we got more information. And so they all really understood that word revise because they had the perfect example. And then your idea of using the vocabulary is awesome as well for really linking those objectives, because by 4th grade, setting conflict, setting resolution, that the objective becomes more along the lines of what the author's choice in vocabulary, how does the author's choice in vocabulary support the story elements? So you've already built that in, and you're backfilling the story elements, but moving on to harder objectives by really focusing on the vocabulary. So I love it. Makes me
Well,
happy.
you know, it's your great brain that got mine going.
Ugh.
But when I started to think about this, I thought, what about when you're teaching synonyms? Do a word lesson with every synonym lesson. Don't just slap those words up there. Talk about what their syllable type is. Talk about all those things that they need reviewing. Is that a short vowel? Is it a long vowel? All of that. Homophones, synonyms, antonyms, any fictional text. Think about what you can pull out that you can front load for them and teach for them and combine those objectives. So for nonfiction, I gave you an example. We've got a folder that will be shared with you. And in this folder, we have put some documents. I put some goal setting sheets in there. We have some objectives that are easily linked that we've put in there. And then what I did is I took a VDOE lesson, a really good lesson that I thought was awesome. It's on the website. And then I changed it and showed how I would power it up. And so I highlighted for you in the lesson the changes that I made. And I did add in, let's see if I can make this scroll. I did add in the vocabulary piece. One big thing that I found this year that I did in small group and whole group is whatever piece of text you're going to do, use those words in whatever hook you're using or whatever your pre-lesson is. This lesson that's in the VDOE right now is awesome, but they start off by saying, just choose some random words. And I'm like, no, we're not going to choose random words. We're going to choose words from the article that we're going to read. And so that's what I changed in these lessons. I just kind of wanted to show you how you take a lesson that you did before and how you amp it up, how you turn it into hyperdrive. So all of that's going to be in this folder for you to look at. So this just kind of goes through the same thing. Use this framework for teaching vocabulary. I put in there the Frayer model. I use the Frayer model with my kids. We do the same thing. We draw the 4 squares, but we make them different things when we do the Frayer. We do definition. We do example. There are lots of different things you can do on a Frayer. You can do example, non-example, attributes. I keep it simple for my students because I mostly do intervention, but we do an illustration and we do an example sentence for every time that I teach vocabulary in my small group. So I highly recommend this. And again, if we're going to teach these words, oh, I'm so sorry about my handwriting. It is not the best. I tell the students all that all the time too. But when you're teaching vocabulary, same thing. You want to double dip. Talk about those word study features so that you're double dipping what you are doing. And then I kind of just gave you a list of some other things to do whenever you have an extra minute. Those lining up activities. Line up if you can tell me a fact from our Komodo dragon article. Line up if you knew the setting of Mr. Lincoln's Way and tell me what it is. Line up if you can tell me a word to describe Eugene. If they get into the habit of knowing that you're going to go back and review what you were doing, they're going to love that. And it doesn't just have to be lining up. You have 3 minutes till lunch. Get out your dry erase board. Write a sentence about Eugene. Get out your dry erase board. Write a word to describe Mr. Lincoln. But you want to use every minute of the day. And you want to go back to the things that you did and review those things that you did. So I call them lining up activities, but they're really, you can do them anytime. Just think about, how am I going to come back to this later today? And then I don't know why, but there is nothing like a bag. You put things in a bag and you have kids pull things out of the bag. I don't know what it is. Jen, is there research to support it? I don't know. I don't think that there's research to support it, but one of my favorite activities is when it's a reading lesson to turn it into a writing lesson. So when it's author's purpose, in one bag, I have topics, and in the other bag, I have all kinds of purposes. And they have to pull out the purpose, like inform, and then they pull out the topic, which might be pizza. So now they have to write a couple sentences that would inform someone about pizza. You can order pizza online, so I love to do that. The example I have to show you today is the fact and opinion one. So same thing. I put topics in this bag. I put the words fact or opinion in another bag. And so they pull out a topic like math. So one student pulls that out. The other student pulls out fact, and they have to write a fact about math, not a math fact, not 3 times 3 equals 9, but a fact about math. They get so mad when they don't get opinion because they really want to tell you their opinions about math. I had one in there about homework, and they were so mad. They wanted an opinion about homework. Nope, they had to give a fact about it. But these bag activities are great for lining up whenever you have a minute. They're a great hook.
I also think this is a perfect time to come back to your learning targets, because
Yes.
if we think of fact and opinion, the kids are great at giving their opinions. They're also sometimes pretty good at saying, well, it's a fact that I am opinionated. So I think we need to really come to the learning target and talk about, specifically, I can identify a fact and an opinion and have them reflect, hey, I'm great at telling the opinions. Where I get a little confused is where someone keeps sharing their opinion and you think, oh, because they keep sharing it multiple times, it has to be a fact. So we got to talk of where is the learning target there and where is it actually difficult, because that's where we get into trouble, especially with fact and opinion.
Yes, I'm very glad you said that. Back to the learning targets. I'm very glad you said that. So these are just a few examples of whole group lessons that you can make teaching squared by trying to overlap those standards. And Jen's right, with everything that you do, make sure that you are coming back to those learning targets and you are saying, how are you doing on this? We just did this whole great lesson. How are you doing on it? And let that guide your next lesson in your teaching. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about small group. But I do want to show you just a few of my favorite things for small group. Again, it's about engaging them right away. I mean, do you have those kids that take forever to come to the small group table? And you're like, hello, come on over. We're waiting for you. No, you want whoever's with you at that table, do something fun until that next person comes up. Until Johnny that you've been waiting for finally joins you. And you know what? He's going to come a lot faster next time because he does not want to miss the game. So let me tell you some of the games that I would play with my kids while we were waiting for the other kids. An oral game that I would play, I would either call it a sound chain or make one change. You will not believe how hard this is. My 4th and 5th graders struggled with it really, really a lot. So I would say a word that I knew was in our pattern. Like I might say the word fern. And I was like, you need to make one change to fern. And I would talk about it's the sound. It doesn't have to be the way that it looks. And so maybe the next student would say burn. And I was like, yeah, we changed the beginning. Now somebody else, just make one change. And so they have to listen to what the person said before them, and they have to make one change to it. And then I'll show them what it looked like on the dry erase board, some of the words that they said. Now, this next game, I could not believe how hard it was for my 4th and 5th graders. It's called Last and First. So if I say the word fern, the last sound you hear is the So the next person has to think of a word that starts with And again, I tell them it's about the sound, that it might not be spelled with the same letter, but it's about the sound. It was so hard for them. I actually had to show them on paper first because they're like, what is it you want me to do? And I'm like, I want you to listen to the ending sound and now generate a word on your own. And they got really good at it, and they would beg for it each time. So the other thing that I would do at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, is they would know I would have these word parts written on my board. They would have a stack of Post-its in front of them, and they would write these word parts on the Post-its. And then they'd start to try to put them together to make the words. They loved this. So side, made, bone, wish, in, and home. So they'd write them on their own Post-its. It was really important to me that they wrote them first, and then they would try to make the words. I don't know if you all had plexiglass at your schools, but it was hysterical because my kids would put them right up on the plexiglass and make the words. So they'd say, oh, homemade, inside, bone wish. And I was like, bone wish? Oh, let's try that again. Wishbone. And so see, right when they come to the table, they're doing something because we got to jump right in. Our time is precious at the small group table. It is precious there. So let me show you, I gave you, they love riddle of the day and puzzle of the day. So I shared some of those with you. They don't get cartoons. They really don't. You need to choose cartoons, and there are millions of them out there. You know, this book is defective. I tap the page and nothing happens. And then I gave you some slides with some riddles on there. They love them. Where would an astronaut park his spaceship? A parking meteor. Get it? Yeah, I know. But if they knew there'd be a riddle posted or a cartoon posted, they wanted to come to solve that too. So just think about when they get to your table, how are you going to engage them right away? And riddles and puzzles are all about words. So I would connect them to whatever we were doing.
And
Now
I jump in and bring everybody back to learning targets too, because we've made such tremendous gains in small group by making sure to have learning targets in small group. So, you know, that even especially you said those first activities were very hard for them. You know, the phonemic awareness research is really showing, boys and girls, that your reading develops first by sound. And so if we can build our understanding of sound and how words work, then we can build our ability to read. So our first target is really going to be it's called phonemic awareness. That's a fancy teacher word, but really what we're building is our understanding of sound. Is this easy or hard for you? Because the sharing the why we're doing the activity also helps to engage them and creates that ownership. I think the hardest part for me was getting organized with learning targets at the small group table. And the best idea I ever had was I wrote a whole bunch of targets and then I bound them at the top in a little kind of spiral. And then I would flip them. And I didn't use, of course, every target every day. I would use a little Post-it to kind of mark certain pages so I could flip to it quickly. I knew I had the kids on my side when I was able to identify someone as the learning target person in the group. And that was their job in the group, and they had to flip the learning target to match the activity that we were doing. And
Oh, I
then
love that.
I knew that they took the ownership. They knew why we were doing an activity, and they knew, like, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. And that's when I knew I had them. They were leaders of their own learning. They were focused on their own learning.
I love it. We have those picture holders that you can buy at Michael's. My principal bought them for everybody. And so we put we put our dry erase board or whatever on that. But you're right, Jen, you can just flip right to it. I love that. I love that. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with small group, because I know we have some sessions that are on that specifically. But the other thing that I really found that brought my kids exponentially further was for them to know there was a predictable pattern every day. Every day we were going to do something orally. Every day we were going to do phonics. And I taught them now that that is writing it down. And then every day we were going to read some kind of text. It might be 2 sentences, but every day there would be some kind of text. And every day there'd be some kind of writing, whether it was a dictated word, a dictated sentence. So these are the things that I did every day. And since you'll have access to these slides, I'm not going to go through each one, but you'll see that each day I gave you a different thing that I did. What each day, what was my phonemic, what was my phonics, what was my text, and what was my writing, so that you'll have this as a reference that you can look back at, so that you can see what I did each time. But they knew we were going to do those 4 things every time, and it made a huge difference. So before we run out of time, I must tell you about silly sentences. You talk about combining objectives and getting more power from your teaching. There is nothing like silly sentences. And this came from, I didn't like a lot of the decodables. I didn't think that they were respectful for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, but I knew the kids needed to play with these words. So I started writing silly sentences. I would make up a sentence and write it, or they would even help me do it. Well, then they became experts at writing silly sentences. They would beg me to do silly sentences, and their sentences became stories, and we would take a word like prank and make it the character's name. So let me show you some of my students' silly sentences so you'll see what I mean. And if you look at these, you can tell that EE and EA were our pattern. That was what I was trying to get them to do. I have to not keep my wheel clean, and it was made out of a seed, and it is mean. So you see what I mean? Like, they made these things come to life, but they knew what these words meant. They knew how to use them in a sentence, and they learned when was it EE and when was it EA. They loved it. I could have done it every day of the week, but we only did it on Fridays. And you can see in front of them, they have their chunk blend that they used to make their silly sentences. I think this was the prank one. Yeah, the plane did a prank. And the high ranked, oh goodness, pulled a prank to plan. I mean, their handwriting's not the best either, but they loved these. It is such a great way to power up your lessons in small group. Have them use these words in sentences of their own. Start with one, and then you'll just be amazed at how much better they get at it. And it's just such a good way to play with the words and vocabulary and all of that.
And I have to jump in for a small group though, and like, the one thing my teachers hear me say all the time is time and text, time and text, time and text. So if we really are going to, help our students be exponential learners, we have to set them up for success, but we have to give them time to do it.
Yeah.
So I kind of gave my teachers the analogy. I watched a lot of March Madness basketball this year. And I think we are just excited to have it back on. But when I started watching it, I noticed those teams that were supposed to win, and they would get down from the other team because they started getting down just a couple points, but at that point that they started getting behind the other team, individual players tried to save the day. And they stopped passing as much. They tried to take all the shots themselves. They took crazy shots that weren't there. And I think teachers kind of are in the same mentality right now. It's kind of a little bit of March Madness, that they want to be the saviors. They want to stuff it all in for the kids. And let me show you this, and let me show you that, and let me show you this. So I want to be very clear on our exponential, where we're talking working smarter, not harder. The kids really have to have time to work, to learn, to think about their progress for the objectives. If the teacher does all of the talking all of the time, we're not going to see the exponential gains. And I think it comes in this small group time when they need just time in quality text. They love the silly sentences because they were the ones doing it.
Exactly. They were taking ownership. I love that. Yes. So these were kinds of the things that we feel like we've covered with you today, is that we've got to get the student ownership. The students have got to do that goal setting. And Jen said they've got to reflect on their goals. They've got to go back to their goals, combine standards. And you'll see that document in the folder that we have for you that shows you how to do that. Combine word study with comprehension. Maximize every minute. What can they do while they're lining up? What can you review? And look for opportunities every day of how you can get them to reflect, of how you can power up the instruction. You have our emails. We would love to hear from you if you need anything. And truly, it is really worth it. It is really worth it. The gains that I saw with my students, I just can't even tell you how much they grew by keeping that structure the same in small group, and by doing those whole group lessons where I try to really make it teaching squared. Any last words, Jen? I know you put the weight quote in there so that they can see that.
Yeah, we're just really proud of the work that all educators have done around the state throughout this pandemic. I know everybody just jumped in to help their students and jumped in to really take on, a mountain that we had never climbed before. But
Yes.
We really hope that maybe through this presentation, you saw a little bit more about not learning loss, but learning gaps, and how some very specific and targeted instruction is going to help fill in those gaps exponentially. So thanks for taking time with us.
Yes, thank you.